So I'm all set up for the night. Got my Therm-A-Rest NeoAir Xlite sleeping pad and my Nemo pillow. Um, Testing this out tonight. It's supposed to get down to 35 degrees. I just got this pad, so this is one of the last. We're not gonna have very many more nights where it's getting down into the 30s, so it's a good time to check it out, test it out. But I'm obviously here at the house and everything, so if I do get cold or if it's got a puncture in it, it's not holding air or anything like that, or it doesn't keep me warm, whatever, I can just go on into the house and make my wife scoot over and stay nice and warm.
So I had a chance to try this pad out last night. I gotta get up and let the dogs out and feed them some breakfast and stuff. Then I'll get all this stuff put away and tell you what I thought about it.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about this pad that I used last night. First, I'm going to talk about my experience with pads, because that could help you understand where I'm coming from on my perspective on the pad and everything. And I'm going to talk about the pad, and then one of the other things I was experimenting with last night is sleeping bag versus quilt, and I'll talk about that after the pad if you're interested in hearing that. So my experience with sleeping pads and everything, I've got many nights of just not using any pads at all. I mean, throughout my lifetime, either sleeping in the tent, just on the ground, on the floor of the tent on my sleeping bag, and countless nights just having a sleeping bag laying on the ground out in the woods and everything, and just sleeping like that. I've used the closed cell foam pads, like the blue pads at Walmart, many times throughout my lifetime, mainly just to keep my sleeping bag from getting so wet from laying on the ground, and then also to add a little comfort, what a little bit of comfort in closed cell foam pad provides. But so that's where the majority of my I don't have a lot of experience with an inflatable pad so much. Most of my experience sleeping on the ground is either directly on the ground or on the floor of the tent, or on a closed cell foam pad. Back in the mid 90s, I bought a Therm-A-Rest 3/4 length self-inflatable pad, and I used that just for a little bit more comfort. I was getting a little bit older, and my body was feeling the aches and pains a little bit more, so having that 3/4 length pad just provided some comfort for my shoulders and hips and stuff like that. And I've used always synthetic pads. Synthetic sleeping bags, because the getting that moisture and stuff from the ground, it doesn't hurt as bad as a down sleeping bag would. So my only real experience, I tried, when I was little, those little beach, those little floating inflatable pads that you can float on and stuff like that. They're not worth carrying or using. But really, the only substantial use I've had with an inflatable pad is that Therm-A-Rest 3/4 length pad. And that's not really for warmth or anything, it's just for comfort. So that's my perspective on it. I haven't had any real experience using a pad for the insulation value. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear and everything. The pad I got is a Therm-A-Rest NeoAir, and it weighs 12 ounces. What I did is I got the women's regular. Did it for a couple of reasons. I got this at Enlightened Equipment's website. They had an overstock of them, so they were on sale. Brought it down from, I think, $199 to $139, and the women's NeoAir is a little bit lighter, but also the other ones have a R value of 4.2. The women's is 5 point something. I had it wrote down and I lost it. 5.4. So with the women's regular pad being shorter, it's same width, 20 inches as the regular ones. You can get a wider version as 25 of the regular pads, but same width as the regular pads, but the women's regular is shorter and it goes from a 4.2 to a 5.4. So the way I looked at it, it was on sale. I saved about $70. It was shorter, so there's less material, lighter, and the insulation value being higher. So that's why I went with the women's. I'm 5'8", so the length is not all there, but I wear shorts all year round, all winter and everything, and my feet don't get cold or anything. So if they're off the pad, it's not going to be an issue. And I normally sleep on my side. So when I'm sleeping on my side, I have my legs kind of curled up a little bit. Otherwise, you're just sitting there trying not to fall over all night. But so drawing my legs up just a little bit, I can be on the pad completely. I was concerned about, I've always used a sleeping bag instead of a quilt. And I was concerned about would a pad actually keep me warm. Temperature got down to 35 last night, and would it keep me warm with no warmth underneath me? Now I know by no warmth underneath me, I'm talking about with my sleeping bag, there was some warmth from the sleeping bag underneath me. I know a lot of people are going to chime in, oh yeah, you compress the insulation and no value and everything. Very, very true with a down sleeping bag. A sleeping bag, yes, you compress it and it's not as effective, but there's still a layer of material underneath you that does provide some warmth. Down, the great thing about down is it's compressible. The bad thing about down is it's compressible. So yes, you can still get, and a lot of people are going to say, oh no, you get no value from the sleep, from laying on insulation. You can't tell me when I've been sleeping in the 20s and teens and all that stuff directly on the ground with no pad, that sleeping bag didn't give me some insulation. I mean, there's no way. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it through the night. So, I can't remember if I said or not, but the package in the stuff sack is 10 by 4, roughly 10 inches by 4 inches, measuring straight across. They got the newer valves on there, that wing valve and everything. That worked out really well. Get this open. It's got this little wing valve in there. That seemed to work out pretty good. The box, it comes with the pump stack, and this thing was kind of hard to get on the air fitting, air valve. It kept kind of slipping off and everything, but once I clicked it on there, it was locked in place. And I tried this bag last weekend when I got it at the house. I just aired it up and just laid on it there in the house to see how it felt. So I pumped it up with that this time, and I pumped it up with this last night. It worked out really well. And when I first laid on it at the house last weekend and tried laying on my side and everything, it was a little bit too firm. I was feeling some pressure points on my hip and everything. And last night I didn't air it as full, and so it was great. There was no pressure points on my hips or shoulders or knees or anything like that. So really good. And that's with anything like an inflatable pad or something, just how much air you put in it can make a really big difference. So it's got a field repair kit, everything you need to patch a hole in it and everything, the warranty information, the information about the valve, and a little enlightened equipment sticker. That's what all came with it. I think the pad did really well. last night. Like I said, it got down to 35, and I was nice and warm. Not any issues. Sleeping on my back, I normally sleep on my side or stomach. And every once in a while, some nights, I'll sleep on my back for a short amount of time. It felt really weird. I think it's 2.5 inches thick, the pad is. And when I was sleeping on the pad on my back, your arms, because it's only 20 inches wide, and I'm a small guy, I'm not real wide or anything, but still, when I laid my arms down, they would drop down below me, and that was just really uncomfortable and everything. And the only way I could lay on my back is I kind of had to cross my hands over my chest, but then as soon as I'd fall back to sleep, they'd just drop down and drop down behind me. And yeah, I definitely think if you sleep um, on your back, then you definitely need to get a wider pad. Matter of fact, I did. There is one other inflatable pad I bought earlier last year, and it's a wider pad, and I bought that. It is insulated and everything, but I've never slept with it on the ground. I used it in my hammock, and to try it out inside the hammock, and it worked out really well. But it was a wider pad. I think if I was sleeping on there's no way if I slept on my back I would go with a 20-inch pad. Um, a lot of people talk about the noise of these NeoAirs, and sound like a potato chip bag. Every time you see it on the video, they're sitting there just crunching, 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 crunching. Yeah, if you sit there and do that, it's loud and obnoxious. Actually sleeping on it, it'll make a little bit of noise, like if you're rolling over or moving, or a little bit of noise, but nowhere near as obnoxious as they make it sound when they're just sitting there saying, "Oh yeah, this bag is loud and noisy and all that kind of stuff." Sleeping on it was not an issue. People talk about, yeah, you're gonna wake up the whole camp and all that kind of stuff. It's not that bad at all. And besides, I normally solo camp anyway, so I ain't nobody to wake up except for the bears out there. Um, so that was it. As far as it did slide out from underneath me a lot. I was sleeping on my porch because if the weather, if it didn't keep me warm or whatever, I wanted to be able to just walk inside and go to bed instead of just suffering through the night. But there were several times, well, not several, but there was twice I woke up and like the pad was laying this way and I was laying this way, and I don't know how it kept. I guess the slick surface of that composite decking on might have helped it slide around a little bit more. Maybe if I was on the ground, it wouldn't have been so bad. Yeah, it's a good pad, not near as loud as everybody makes it sound. And that first night I got it, I was showing my wife, and yes, if you sit there and just sit there and crunch it, it is loud and annoying. But sleeping on it wasn't bad. Kept me really warm. I was really surprised about that. Hoping that it would do that, but it did a really good job. Down to 35, no issues at all. With the pad, there is some issues where I did get chilly, and that's about my bag, and I'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, I would definitely recommend them as far as an insulated pad. But if you sleep on your back, man, I would not go with a 20-inch, because like I said, I'm a small guy, and if my arms are dropping back behind me, anybody else is definitely going to have an issue with it. So take that into consideration if you sleep on your back. And so that's it with the pad. Yeah, it was nice. It's light. I'm going to use it in the winter time. I still won't use, if I use any pad at all during the summer, it'll probably be my Therm-A-Rest 3/4 length. This is a Therm-A-Rest, and that other pad I have, that's the 3/4 length pad. Just to say something about Therm-A-Rest, I bought that in the mid-90s, and it's still going strong. I've used it all over the place, and can't even begin to count how many nights I've used it since the mid-90s. Still no issues, works great. So I'm hoping to get the same quality out of this. Okay, so that's it. That's what it comes with. The R value is 5.4. I've never used an insulated bag, so rating, you know, how a 5.4 versus a 2 point whatever, I don't know. I know that 5.4 at 35 degrees did a good job keeping it warm. One of the reasons I did get a little bit cold last night, and one of the other things I was trying to do was, I've always used a sleeping bag, and I've thought about using a quilt, and so I was using my sleeping bag as a quilt on a pad to see what that was like, and I didn't really like it. So I hammock camp mainly, and I always use my sleeping bag, winter, summer, whatever. I use a sleeping bag as a quilt in the hammock, but the way the sides slope down, it keeps that sleeping bag bunched up around you on the sides and everything, and I've never really had any problems with cold air getting in and stuff. Last night, there was several times I woke up because this, you know, the sleeping bag would be lifted up a little bit somewhere, and I'd get that cold air coming in there, and it would wake me up, and I'd have to readjust the bag, and then go back to sleep. And later on, it was, you know, somewhere else there was a gap, and that happened several times throughout the night. Now I do know that they make those straps for pads with quilts and everything. They got the loops on them that slip over the quilt, slip over the pad, and then it's got clips on it. You can clip your quilt on there so it doesn't move around, and it keeps it tighter and everything. If I was going to go with a quilt, I would definitely do that, because last night kind of sucked because of the different gaps, cold air gaps I was getting. But as far as using a quilt for the winter time on the ground, I don't think I will ever do that, because and the reason I was experimenting with sleeping bag or quilt is I was thinking about getting I'm doing a backpacking trip in October, and I want for that trip I want to have everything I can to be gear that I made. So I'm trying to decide, should I make a sleeping bag or should I make a quilt? I think I'm gonna go with sleeping bag after last night, because the quilt, I think having the straps on there would help out, you know, so you're not getting those little drafts and everything. And one thing that did make the draft, that happen more often, is what I tend to do is in the wintertime, in the wintertime, to add a little bit of warmth, I will sleep, even if whether I have the sleeping bag zipped up like a sleeping bag or if I'm using it as a quilt in a hammock, I will take that flap that's kind of a pillow of the sleeping bag, when it's laying on top of me like a quilt, I'll kind of throw that over my head. I'll have a little bit of opening there for fresh air and everything, but I'll put that pad over me, and that hood over me. So in doing that last night, you know, the way the sleeping bag's made, that pillow thing is like, there's not much fabric between there and the zipper and stuff. So when it was laying on top of me, and I kind of had that hood over me, because that hood's in the way anyway, and it just throw it over my head, add a little bit of warmth. So there wasn't a whole lot of material on this side of me, and that's where I was getting a lot of my drafts. If it got pulled up, if I rolled over, or if it got pulled up any at all, you know, I'd get that cold air. So that was a big nuisance, and that's why, you know, a quilt, and you've got the fabric centered and everything, and you got the straps, would probably work better. Like I said, in a hammock, it doesn't matter even using my sleeping bag like that, because the tapered slopes of the hammock makes the excess material bunch up around you. You don't really get those gaps. So yes, I think if I had a quilt, or even if I just didn't put that hood on there, if the material was centered on you and you had the straps, I think a quilt would work. Whether it was a quilt or you were using a sleeping bag as a quilt, I think it would work, and you wouldn't get as many drafts. But my one big issue, my one big hang up that made me really decide that I'm going to stick with a sleeping bag for wintertime use. Summertime, a quilt's not that big of an issue, but wintertime use, if I'm using a pad for the warmth below me, and I'm way out in the middle of the woods, if that pad gets a leak, I've got nothing to keep me warm from below, because a quilt, there's not really enough material to go all the way around you like a sleeping bag does. And I don't want to get out in the middle of nowhere and then have to have a miserable night because my pad got some little leak in it that I can't find. Yeah, I got the repair kit and everything, but sometimes those little pinhole leaks are really hard to find, to the point that I know some people have had to get them in a bathtub to find out where it's bubbling at, to find the hole, because they just couldn't find it out in the field. So I don't want to risk that. The first thing that'll kill you in any kind of survival situation, and I know camping is not a survival situation, but it could become if things go bad. But the first thing that'll kill you is weather. Extreme cold, extreme hot, rain, whatever. The elements will kill you first. And being out in the middle of nowhere, especially by yourself, I don't want to get in a situation where my only source of warmth is a pad that can get a hole in it and then fail completely. So I am going to continue using a sleeping bag, and I think in the future I will probably use the sleeping bag like a sleeping bag on top of that, instead of using the quilt, because instead of using it like a quilt. I might try the straps and see if I can clip them on there and that helps, but I got woke up too many times last night with just that little cold air coming in, you know, from some little gap where it wasn't up on the ground. So I might try the straps and just clip them onto my sleeping bag and see if that helps with that. I don't know, but I am not using my only means of keeping me alive out in the woods in the middle of winter on a very cold night is a pad that can get a hole in it. It's just not smart. And then you get into the worst case scenarios, get in a situation where it's so bad that you decide to walk out. Now you're walking out in the middle of the night, and all kinds of issues can happen from then. So why take a chance? I just will stick with a sleeping bag, because I know a sleeping bag, down in the 20s, down in the teens, I've been, and even down below zero, not crazy like 40 below or anything like that, but I've been down below zero many times in a sleeping bag with no insulation underneath me, in a synthetic sleeping bag with no insulation underneath me, and have done fine. So that's it. That's one of the things I was trying to decide. And if anybody's trying to decide with their own gear whether they want to get have a sleeping bag and they're thinking about going to a quilt, that's just something to take into consideration. If you're going to, in my opinion, if you're going to be camping in cold temperatures, and you're thinking about using a quilt, and your only source of warmth from the ground is something that could get a hole in it, man. A lot of people do it, but is that the smartest thing? You know, and then what type of camping are you doing too? You know, are you camping where there's in a campground where there's other people around, or backpacking a really busy trail where there's other people around, or are you totally out by yourself and everything? Things to keep in mind. But Therm-A-Rest, like I said, this is a women's NeoAir Xlite with a 5.4 R value. I think it did really good in keeping me warm, and look forward to using it again. Really comfortable too, especially for sleeping on the ground. I normally stay in a hammock, but sleeping on the ground on that pad with a little bit of air out of it, so it didn't get the pressure points on my knees and hips and stuff. I was really happy with the sleep, and if I would have used my sleeping bag like a sleeping bag on top of that, man, it would have been golden. I would have slept like a baby. So that's it. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about the pad, what my impressions of it were on my first use, and my thoughts on sleeping bags or quilts, whatever you think is best? What I think is best?